I knew something was off the moment I saw the Prius parked in my private spot again. It wasn't just any spot. It was the one I paid for, month after month, in the underground garage beneath Oakview Estates. I'd had the lease to that spot for years. The deed sat in my filing cabinet right next to the lease for something else. The entire block of units from 300 to 348, West Marlin Drive. Long story short, I inherited it from my uncle, who'd bought up half the block back when property here was dirt cheap. But I kept that little detail to myself because, frankly, I like to know who the snakes were before I rattled the cage. And today? That Prius belonged to the HOA president herself, Amber Green. Amber was every bit the stereotype. Platinum bob, oversized sunglasses, clipboard surgically attached to her wrist. She ran the Oakview HOA like a dictatorship with a touch of glitter. Fines for unsightly mailboxes, warnings for garbage bins not aligned perfectly, and my personal favorite, aggressive wind chimes. She'd slapped me with that one last fall. I was done playing nice. I took a deep breath and walked into the lobby where she was chatting with one of her minions, probably about my front hedges. Amber, I said evenly, you're in my assigned parking spot. She turned like a cat caught in the act, but immediately went on the offensive. That spot is open property. You don't have a decal. I don't need a decal. I have the lease. She crossed her arms. Well, it's HOA policy that all residents display a decal. No exceptions. If you don't like it, you can take it up with the board. I'm not a resident, I said. I'm the property owner of units 300 through 348. Her mouth twitched. Excuse me. I own the leases. Every single one of them. Including your unit, Amber. Now, I didn't drop that bomb often. But watching her face cycle through disbelief, denial, then full-blown panic? Worth it. You're bluffing, she said quickly. I'm not. I pulled out my phone and showed her the scanned lease agreements. And the parking spot? It's private, leased under my name. You've got about 5 minutes to move your car before I have it towed. Amber's eyes flicked to the screen. This is ridiculous. You can't just barge in and, I've been quiet for years, Amber. I've watched you fine retirees for lawn chairs and threaten single moms over sidewalk chalk. I let it slide. But you crossed a line today. You're not above the HOA. No, I said, but you're not above the law. And I'm done letting you pretend you are. She didn't say another word, just stormed out the door, heels clicking like gunshots. I watched her march straight to the garage, fumble with her keys, and peel out of the spot like a teenager caught sneaking out. I looked around the lobby. A few other residents had overheard, their eyes wide. One of them, Mr. Colby from 304, nodded at me like I'd just punched a hole in the clouds. I had a feeling this was only the beginning. Amber wasn't the type to back down. But neither was I. The next morning, I found a letter taped to my front door. No envelope, just a single sheet of paper with the Oakview Estates HO header stretched across the top in a bold serif font. The text beneath was short and laughably dramatic. Effective immediately, you are hereby prohibited from using the underground garage due to ongoing security concerns. This is a temporary safety precaution authorized by the HOA board. Amber's signature was at the bottom, written in looping cursive like she was signing a treaty. I folded the page, walked back inside, and opened my laptop. First, I pulled up the lease agreements again to ensure I hadn't missed anything. The garage space was clearly listed under a separate clause, protected for the duration of the master lease. I'd had my attorney draft it airtight years ago when I was still managing the properties remotely. Then I opened the Oakview HOA charter, which, thanks to public filing requirements, was available online. Under Article 4, Section 2, it specifically stated, the HOA shall not infringe upon privately held leases or interfere with rights granted under said agreements. That letter was more than a bluff. It was a violation. By sundown, I'd submitted an official complaint to the County Housing Commission. I attached the lease, HOA charter, and a time-stamped video from my security camera showing Amber taping the letter to my door. The camera was new, installed a month earlier after someone started leaving anonymous citations on the windshields of cars parked in my unit's guest spots. I wasn't the only one getting targeted. Over the past few weeks, several tenants had reported misfiled dues, which mysteriously resulted in late fees. Others had received notices about unauthorized pets, even though the HOA had no jurisdiction over leaseholders not under their contract. One of my tenants, a retired Air Force mechanic named Curtis, had been told to remove the American flag hanging on his porch because it clashed with the complex's visual tone. I'd brushed off these incidents as overreach, but now it looked more like a pattern. That night, I made a few calls. First to my attorney, then to a friend from college, now a deputy district attorney. I asked one question: what would it take to open a fraud investigation into an HOA board? He asked for documentation. I had plenty. By the next afternoon, I was sitting in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe across from a woman named Rachel Nguyen, the county's lead investigator for municipal fraud. She wore a slate gray blazer and had a tablet she barely looked away from as I scrolled through folders on my laptop. "You're not just accusing them of mismanagement," she said. "You're alleging criminal interference with private property." I nodded. "And I've got 37 tenants who can confirm targeted harassment. Many of them have emails and letters. Some have video." Her fingers paused. 37? They're tired of being pushed around. And I think you'll find the HOA's financial filings are inconsistent. I've got 2 years' worth of assessments and expenditures from Amber's tenure. The math doesn't add up. Rachel didn't smile, but her eyes lifted from the screen. If even half of this checks out, we're looking at embezzlement. Possibly forgery, depending on how they've been issuing citations. I handed her a flash drive. Everything's timestamped. I've also included names of board members and a list of contractors paid under the HOA's budget. One of them hasn't existed since 2019. She took the drive. "I'll fast-track this." By the time I got home, someone had deflated all 4 of my tires. Curtis met me out front with a grim face and a folding chair. "Saw a blue sedan roll past 20 minutes ago. License plate had a sticker from the HOA office lot." "I'll check the footage," I said. He nodded. "You stirred something. People are nervous, but they're with you." That night, I hosted a quiet gathering in Unit 322, one of the vacant units I kept furnished for emergencies. 12 tenants showed up. Several brought folders. One woman, Sophia, had a full binder of letters she'd received over the past year. Most of them were unsigned. A few had been backdated. "It started with my flower pots," she said. "Then it escalated. One day a guy came by and told me if I didn't stop violating aesthetic codes, I'd face legal action. He wasn't a lawyer. He just said he was authorized." A man named Lionel pulled out his phone and showed us a video of Amber walking into his backyard unannounced, pointing at his patio furniture, then leaving. Said it wasn't weatherproof certified. I asked her what that even meant. She just walked away. I took notes. Every story added another brick to the growing structure of evidence. The more we talked, the more it became clear Amber and her board weren't just overstepping, they were systematically targeting anyone they couldn't control. The final piece came from a woman named Denise. She looked exhausted, but steady. "My mortgage increased out of nowhere last month," she said. "The bank said it was due to unpaid HOA dues. But I've never been under HOA jurisdiction. I rent from you." My stomach tightened. "They sent the bank a lien notice," she continued. "Claimed I was in violation of the community agreement." I opened my laptop and pulled up her lease. "You're explicitly exempt. They had no legal grounds to do that." Rachel needed to hear this. I made a second copy of the flash drive and added Denise's documents. The next morning, I dropped it off at her office and left without ceremony. 2 days later, every board member at Oakview Estates received a subpoena. The fallout started slow. First, the HOA offices were closed for maintenance. Then the community website went offline. A few residents received letters from the interim board, handwritten apologies for clerical errors regarding dues and citations. But the real turning point came when the county posted a public notice on the HOA bulletin board. A formal investigation was underway into financial misconduct and abuse of authority. Amber disappeared. One of the residents said they saw her loading a U-Haul in the middle of the night. Her unit sat dark after that. Mail piled up. The Prius never reappeared. 3 weeks later, I stood in front of the community court at the municipal building. Not as a landlord, not as a complainant, but as a witness. Rachel presented everything: documents, video, testimony. Amber had been siphoning HOA funds into a dummy landscaping company registered under her cousin's name. Fines were being fabricated to create artificial debts, which she then used to threaten residents into silence. In at least 5 cases, she'd forged signatures to authorize citations. The judge didn't hesitate. Amber was charged with fraud, falsification of records, and harassment. Her assets were frozen. The HOA's control was suspended, pending a full audit. After the hearing, as tenants gathered outside, Curtis came up beside me. "You think they'll dissolve the whole thing?" he asked. "Depends on what they find in the audit," I said. "But if they don't, we'll be ready. We've got voting rights now." He looked around at the others' neighbors who'd stopped being strangers the moment they stood up together. "Funny," he said. "All it took was a stolen parking spot." I nodded. Some people picked the wrong fight. The wind had shifted in Oakview Estates. For the first time in years, residents walked their dogs without checking over their shoulders. Morning joggers ran past the HOA office without the usual side glances. But the silence that followed Amber's disappearance wasn't peace, it was anticipation. Everyone was waiting to see what would be uncovered next. I didn't have to wait long. Rachel called me on a Thursday afternoon. I was on my porch, installing a new motion sensor floodlight, when her name buzzed across my phone. Her tone was measured, but not neutral. "We pulled digital records from the HOA's internal server," she said. "There's something you need to see." I met her at the county administrative building later that evening. The office was sterile gray carpet, fluorescent lights, but on the screen in front of us was something that made my stomach turn. There, in a folder buried inside a series of nested directories labeled with vague acronyms, was a spreadsheet titled Compliance Incentive Tier 3. It listed over 20 names residents of Oakview Estates next to dates, amounts, and brief notes. The amounts varied, but the pattern was unmistakable. Private bank transfers had been made from the HOA's discretionary fund, supposedly to reimburse beautification projects. But the notes told another story. Next to one name, paid to support citation against Unit 308. Another, covered roof repair in exchange for voting against leaseholder motion. And then, scrawled next to Denise's name, flag her mortgage non-compliant, no leverage left. "This wasn't just about money," I said, trying to keep my voice even. "They were buying silence and punishing dissent." Rachel nodded grimly. "It's worse. 3 of these payments were made to board members' relatives. That's misappropriation with intent to manipulate voting outcomes. It crosses from civil violation into criminal conspiracy." "What's next?" "We're bringing in a state prosecutor. It's officially beyond the county scope." The following week, unmarked vehicles rolled into Oakview Estates. Investigators in plainclothes moved swiftly, collecting hard drives, seizing file cabinets, and interviewing residents. They worked quietly but efficiently, knowing the board had already tried to cover their tracks once. Curtis called me that night. They asked me about a meeting from last March. Said they needed to confirm who was present when Amber announced the new landscaping surcharge. I remembered that meeting. Amber had claimed the HO had to respond to new municipal standards, but when I checked with the city that same night, no new ordinance existed. 2 days later, subpoenas went out to 3 local contractors. All of them had been listed on the HOA's expense reports repeatedly, but only one had ever actually done work in the community. The other 2? Shell companies, one registered to a P.O. box in Nevada, the other to a closed-down hair salon in Bakersfield. As the investigation deepened, the interim board composed of volunteers from the community uncovered a locked cabinet in the old HOA office. Inside were dozens of sealed envelopes, each containing printed copies of anonymous complaints and signed fines, and in 2 cases, forged letters threatening eviction. These were never sent out. They'd been stockpiled, like weapons in reserve. This was premeditated, Rachel said during our next update. They were preparing to escalate. I met her eyes. What tipped them off? Why now? She hesitated. We believe your confrontation with Amber accelerated their timeline. She started withdrawing funds more aggressively after that. We think she intended to liquidate and vanish. She didn't get far. No. And now, it's likely she won't be the only one answering charges. By the end of the month, 5 former board members were named in a formal indictment. Charges included fraud, conspiracy to commit property interference, and corruption of local governance structures. But the damage they'd done still lingered. One morning, I found Lionel, who'd shown us that video of Amber in his backyard standing in front of a crumbling retaining wall behind his unit. He looked tired. They told me the HOA would cover this last year, he said. Said it was part of the Emergency Infrastructure Fund. I examined the base. The concrete was flaking apart like stale bread. You've got tree roots pushing the whole thing forward, I said. This should have been excavated and reinforced, not patched. He gave a dry laugh. Guess that fund paid for Amber's cousin's new SUV instead. I called in a contractor from my own network. A week later, the wall came down and new rebar went up. I paid for it myself. Not because I had to, but because I could, and because someone had to start fixing what they'd broken. Meanwhile, the interim board held an open forum, something that had never happened under Amber's rule. Every seat on the community lawn was filled. I stood near the back with Denise, who now had a letter from her bank formally voiding the lien her mortgage had suffered. A young woman named Marisol, who'd moved into one of my units 6 months ago, stepped up to the microphone. I moved here because it was supposed to be quiet, she said. But I spent my first month being told my curtains were the wrong color and that my dog's collar bell was disruptive. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Nervous, but real. I didn't know my neighbors. I was scared to speak up. But now, we're talking. We're helping each other. I never thought I'd say this, but thank you. To everyone who refused to stay quiet. After the meeting, I walked back to my unit. Halfway there, I heard a voice behind me. You planning on staying anonymous forever? It was Sophia, the woman with the binder of complaints. She had a grocery tote slung over her shoulder and a knowing look in her eye. I like watching the pieces move, I said. I don't need a title. You've got influence now. People listen to you. I looked around. Porch lights were on. Kids played on scooters near the corner. No one was hiding anymore. I don't want influence, I said. I want transparency. If we get that, I'll fade into the background again. She tilted her head. Well, if you ever run for board, I'm voting for you. Before I could respond, a sedan pulled slowly down the main road. It was unmarked, but the man behind the wheel wore a badge on his belt. He parked outside the old HOA office and stepped out with a clipboard. Sophia watched him go. More fallout. Probably. But it's a good sign, I said. The state had stepped in to oversee the HOA for 6 months. During that time, no new fees could be issued without review, and all community decisions had to be voted on publicly. The residents were finally in control of their own neighborhood, and they were making the most of it. Curtis started a neighborhood watch. Marisol was organizing a weekend garden exchange. Even Lionel had volunteered to help repaint the faded curb numbers free of charge. As for Amber, she was awaiting trial. Her assets were frozen, her reputation dismantled, and her former allies had vanished like smoke. I never saw her again. But every time I pulled into my parking spot clearly labeled, precisely painted, I smiled at the thought that it had started with a single act of entitlement. She wanted a place to park. She ended up losing everything. And we got our neighborhood back. 3 months passed. The air in Oakview Estates felt different now, lighter, like someone had finally opened a window in a sealed room. The HOA building remained shuttered, a padlocked symbol of everything the residents had endured. Grass had started to grow wild around its foundation, and someone had scraped the golden Oakview Estates Association lettering off the front sign. No one bothered to replace it. But the real change wasn't aesthetic. It was structural. The state-appointed administrator, a soft-spoken logistics analyst named Marcus Bell, had taken over operations temporarily. Marcus was the kind of guy who carried 3 pens and spoke in bullet points. Cold, methodical, and exactly what we needed. He didn't care about curtain colors or mailbox height. He cared about balance sheets and verifiable procedures. And right now, he was the only thing standing between Oakview and a full dissolution of its HOA charter. I had just finished my morning coffee when Marcus called. There's something you should see, he said. Bring someone you trust. I met him at the county records office. Curtis came with me. He had recently started helping Marcus with property maintenance schedules, a far cry from his old job fixing jet engines, but it kept him sharp and involved. We were led to a records room in the basement, where Marcus had laid out a set of blueprints and a series of scanned documents under a flickering ceiling light. These are the original property development plans from when Oakview Estates was founded, he began. They show parcel divisions, utility easements, and common access corridors. Curtis leaned over the table. Why are we looking at these now? Because, Marcus said, flipping to a newer set of overlays. These were the maps submitted by the HOA last year to the county zoning board during their proposal to increase community dues. He placed them side by side. The difference was subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. But there it was. A small, shaded section near the northeast border of the property had been extended by 20 feet beyond its original boundary, encroaching onto lots that technically weren't under HOA jurisdiction, including Denise's unit. and 2 others. They tried to redraw the map, I said. They did more than that, Marcus replied. They used this doctored version to justify assessments on properties they didn't legally control. And here's the kicker, this version was notarized. Curtis's jaw tightened. So they found someone to stamp a fake? A notary named Alan Vickers, Marcus said. Retired now. But he's under investigation. Claimed he was told these were corrections to a previous filing. Signed off without verifying anything. I folded my arms. This is fraud. Not just financial. This is title manipulation. Marcus nodded. And it gets worse. He handed me a USB drive. The county's forensic audit found a series of encrypted files on the HOA's server. One of them was a list of addresses marked with a red flag. These weren't just residents Amber didn't like. These were targets. Curtis stared at him. Targets for what? Insurance manipulation. I blinked. What do you mean? Marcus pulled out another document. It was a policy statement from a regional underwriter detailing a bulk property insurance plan taken out by the HOA. They filed a separate policy for high-risk units they claimed had structural issues or repeated code violations. But none of these were reported to the city. It was all internal, based on their own citations. He tapped the paper. They inflated the risk profile to increase payouts, then pocketed the difference between the actual repair costs and the claims. Curtis looked stunned. They were staging violations to commit insurance fraud? Exactly. We left the records office with a folder of evidence and a growing sense of unease. This wasn't just petty corruption anymore. Amber and her board had built an entire ecosystem of deceit, and they'd left a paper trail that now led directly to the district attorney's office. Within 2 weeks, arrest warrants were issued for 2 former board members, Marlene Pierce, who had overseen the HOA's insurance filings, and Greg Sutton, who had served as treasurer. Both were picked up quietly, no headlines, just the soft thump of doors closing behind unmarked cruisers. Amber's trial date was set. She'd been denied bail after prosecutors revealed she had attempted to withdraw over $200,000 from a Cayman Islands account 2 days before the subpoenas hit. Her attorney, a slick corporate defense specialist from Los Angeles, tried to paint the entire case as a misinterpretation of community management policy. The judge wasn't amused. The trial was held in a mid-sized courtroom downtown. I was called to testify on the 3rd day. The room was colder than I expected, and the lights made everything feel overexposed. Amber sat at the defense table in a navy suit, her hair pulled back tightly. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She just stared ahead, unmoving, as I described the forged maps, the manipulated assessments, and the fake citations. The prosecutor, a woman named Leslie Grant, asked a single question after my testimony. Mr. Renner, to your knowledge, did the defendant have any legal authority to alter the property boundaries of Oakview Estates? No. Did she consult with city planning or zoning officials before submitting the revised maps? No. And were any of the so-called violations she cited backed by municipal inspection reports? None. Leslie turned to the jury. No further questions. Amber's attorney tried to discredit me by suggesting my role as a landlord gave me motive to undermine the HOA. But the jury didn't buy it. Not after seeing the notarized maps, the insurance documents, and hearing from Denise, who described how her mortgage company nearly foreclosed on her because of a falsified lien. The trial lasted 6 days. On the final afternoon, the jury returned a unanimous verdict. Guilty on all counts: fraud, conspiracy, forgery, and attempted wire transfer with intent to defraud. Amber's sentence: 8 years, no possibility of parole for 5. Curtis and I watched the verdict from the back row. He didn't say anything until the courtroom emptied. Well, he said, guess you won't be needing that parking spot anymore. I let the silence linger between us. It wasn't joy we felt, not exactly. Just relief. Like the neighborhood had been holding its breath for too long and could finally exhale. Over the next few weeks, Oakview Estates began to transform. The interim board, with Marcus overseeing the transition, proposed a full dissolution of the HOA. It passed with 89% approval. The residents voted to form a cooperative association instead, voluntary, transparent, and focused on shared upkeep, not control. Every financial decision was posted publicly, every vote recorded and archived. I handed off all leases for the units I owned to a local management group. I stayed involved, but from a distance. The neighborhood didn't need me to fight anymore. They built something stronger than any HOA charter could contain, a community based on trust, not fear. One evening, I stood at the edge of the sidewalk, watching kids play tag between lawn chairs set up for a block party. Someone had hung string lights between trees, and a local food truck was parked by the curb. Music drifted from open windows. Laughter echoed across yards. No citations, no threats, just life. Sophia approached, holding a paper plate stacked with tamales. "Didn't think I'd see the day," she said, offering me one. "I didn't think I'd be here for it," I replied, taking it. She looked at the party. "Curtis says you're thinking of selling." "Maybe," I said. "Maybe not. I'm not in a rush. You should stay. This place needs people who remember what it used to be like." I glanced toward the old HOA office. The building had been repurposed into a community library. Kids darted in and out with books tucked under their arms. "I don't think they'll forget," I said. "Not after everything." She nodded. "Still, it helps to have someone who saw it all." I didn't answer, just stood there, tamale in hand, watching the light bounce off the faces of people who had once been strangers and were now something more. The last thing I noticed before walking home was the parking spot, the one that started it all. Still freshly painted. Still empty. Reserved, but unused. I left it that way. Not out of pettiness. Out of principle. Some lines, once drawn, stay drawn.